This is a Nike shoe dashboard, which is made featuring the new button slicer from the November Power BI release. This is a very quick project, which only takes one dataset. So I'm going to walk you through how to make the entire dashboard, as well as all of the features of this new button slicer. So let's dive right in. Credits for the design go to Matthew from Base One. Check out his practice if you're interested in working with him for some really cool designs. The data that we're going to work with is product data from Nike. I'm going to link this in the description along with everything else. And it's a really simple data set. You can actually see here that it's basically just got a URL of the actual listing, the product name, the product ID, the price, sale price, discount, brand description, but most importantly, it has images. Unfortunately, the images aren't properly formatted for us to be able to use immediately in Power BI, so we are going to do something in PowerQuery. First, we're just going to download this, and then we're going to use PowerQuery to modify it so that we can use it in our dashboard. In order to do what I'm about to do, you need to have the latest Power BI desktop version. It's the November version from the 15th of November. Make sure you have at least this version in order to actually do what I'm about to do. So we're simply going to start by loading the data set. I'm going to hit Get Data, click on Text CSV, and I'm going to load this data. We do need to do a couple of changes in PowerQuery to make sure that it works. So I'm going to hit Transform Data, and there's really not that much that we need to do. What we're going to do is we're going to transform the images column, which is near the very end. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the drop down and I'm going to click on Remove Empty. This is basically just going to filter out all the items that don't exist. Because this is a showcase and I want to show you how the images can be used in the button slicer, we don't need the rows that have no images. Then I'm going to right click. I'm going to click on Replace Values. I need to do this because the data itself is actually not just one URL, but multiple different URLs that are basically being separated by a comma and have a lot of quotation marks and things in there. So we're just going to get rid of all of those things that we don't need. So I'm going to type the value to find quotation, and I'm just going to hit OK. And that's going to remove all of the quotation marks. And we need to do this 2 more times to replace the square brackets. Once that's done, what I need to do is with the images column selected, I'm going to go to split column by delimiter. Once I do this, I'm going to just make sure that it is a comma and hit OK. And basically what that has done is it's taken this column, which had multiple different URLs in it, and basically made each of those URLs its own specific column. This is what we're going to need in order to actually use them, and that's all we need to do. So we hit close and apply, and let's go back to our Power BI report. First thing that you actually want to check once you're back here is go to the Insert Visual Gallery and make sure that you have these 2 icons. We need to have the card new and the slicer new. The slicer new is the main character for today, which we're going to go through deeply. But without these 2, we can't make the rest of the dashboard. So let's just throw in the new slicer and check it out. I am simply going to put in the data set. From the data set, I'm going to put in the product name. And the product name itself is actually going to already put out a really nice grid format, which is going to be the actual slicer. So if we actually want to check that it works as a slicer, we'll probably throw in the product name into a table as well. And you can see that it works really nicely as a slicer. The first thing that I'm actually going to show you is one of the last formatting options, because I want to go into images, select the field, add data field, and we're just going to click on the images 1 column. Honestly, that's all you need to get high quality images into your slicer. We'll walk through all of the different options, but for the main purpose of the button slicer, it works just fine. The first formatting option is size and style, which simply has the height and width of the actual visualization, as well as the XY coordinates, which are simply called horizontal and vertical. Not much to see here, but you've also got the padding. So the visualization itself has a specific space, but the visuals inside also have a specific space. So you can see that if I put 15 here, there's more space between the border of the visual and the actual place where the images start. So always worth checking out. If you put 15 on the side, it actually helps make the visual look more centered, because with the scroll bar, it adds 10 pixels, just something for you to know. You can have a background, The background can be a specific color, and you can change the color and the transparency. Nothing special here. You've got visual borders as well, so you can actually have a specific dark border around it and a shadow. Nothing new, nothing special. And then you've got the title section. It has basically the same title section as everywhere else. It's got a subtitle, it's got a divider, it's got space. For a button slicer, I don't believe that these are the most useful functionalities, but if you want to title your slicers, you can absolutely do that. Add a subtitle, add a metric, that's okay. But we're simply going to remove the title for now. Then you've got the slicer settings, and if you've ever used slicers in Power before, you might notice that it's actually changed a little bit. There's the single select, and then if you turn that off, you've got multi-select. So that means that instead of holding control, you can just select multiple things at once. If you don't have the single select on, you will not see the force selection option, which means that the visualization will always have one item select, which is an option that we've seen before. But if you, of course, turn on the force selection, you will not have a select all option. If you turn it off, you'll see the select all option appears. And that means that a single item will show at the very beginning of the slicer for select all, which is pretty cool, very neat. If I turn off the single select, you won't see the forced select option, but you will see the select all option. For this dashboard, I do not want to have the select all option on, so I'm simply going to turn this off. But really interestingly, you can see that once everything has in fact been selected, select all becomes deselect all, so you can just click on that again to remove your selection. It's really nice. It's slightly different from what we're used to in terms of slicers. Then the shape refers to the actual shape of the buttons. You can have a rectangle, you can have a rounded rectangle, of course with rounded corners. You can customize the style so that specific corners might be more rounded than others, and you can have a snipped tab, so this kind of I want to say letter note. This isn't exactly my favorite, but to each their own. It looks pretty cool in its own way, but we're just going to stick with a rectangle for now. The layout options are pretty cool. It refers to the alignment of the actual cards as well as the grid layout. So right now we have 3x3, but I could choose to do something like 1 row by 3 columns where all of the items are much more in focus. And if I wanted to, it's like adjust the heights a little bit, I could maybe put in 6 columns or something like this. Let's put this table out of the way. So if I have 6 columns, you can see that it kind of has a different effect. Oh, I do like these Air Jordans. But what we're going to do is we're going to have them on the sides. So the rows are going to be 8 and the columns are going to be 1. And then we do it like this, and we'll be able to see more of each shoe. 8 might be too much. We're going to put that down to 6. And for the next part, we're going to actually have 2 different columns. The next part that I want to show you here is this overflow, which is part of layout. There's 2 different things that you can change here, which is the overflow style and direction. In the style, there's a continuous scroll and the pagination. And basically the continuous scroll is just saying that the slicer will have a scroll bar, which is fine. You're just using your scroll wheel to move through this. And the pagination is slightly different because you've got an arrow here at the bottom where you can basically select through. Now the pagination doesn't really, it's like look like anything else than just seeing the next visualizations. But if you select the horizontal, you can actually see that it just alters where the buttons are. It could be up and down, or it could be left or right. On the pagination itself, it doesn't look like so much, but it's more apparent for which direction you're going if you select continuous scroll and you have either horizontal or vertical. So now when I'm scrolling, you can actually see that it's scrolling towards the left and right. But if I have this vertically, of course, it scrolls up and down. Personally, I find that the vertical is just the best. I really think that that's what I would stick to most of the time. We're going to move this back to 1 column and we'll move it back here. Now, moving onwards, we've got the callout values. The most important thing with the callout values is that now we're actually getting into something called states. States are really important because you've got default, hover, press, and selected, which define what state the buttons are in. The default is what you see just normally. Hover is when your mouse is hovering over the actual buttons. Press is when they're literally being clicked on, and selected is a state where they already have been selected, like this Air Jordan 1 mid right here. And this also means that because you have these different states, you can assign different behaviors to what you're looking at. The values here refers to this text right here. And because I've actually put in a little transparency, when I hover over it, you can see that it actually changes a little bit. That's basically what you can do with the callout values. But before we move on, I also want to point out that you can do changes to the state in images as well as the buttons. So these last three formatting options have different state options, while the first couple don't. Now the callout stage, I'm going to basically do something that, in order to make sure that I have the same behavior as what I had previously. I basically had buttons that would show the name of the product when it was hovered over, as well as when it was selected. So let's see if I can do that here as well. In order to do this, the first thing you have to realize is that even though the visualization itself is using the product name in the actual data field, you don't actually need to show this, because it's going to show this all of the time, and that's not what I want for this button slicer. So I'm going to turn off the values. And in the values, of course, you've got display units, auto display units. If it's a blank value, you can show it as a specific text. Some really great things, which we're not going to go into too deeply right now. And instead, I'm going to turn on the label. The label itself, you can add a data field here, but I've simply added the same thing, the product name, and now it's actually showing the values. It's on the default state, and it's on. And because of that, it's showing all of these values. But one thing that I'd like you to know is that a lot of the options don't show unless you're on the default state. For example, if I removed the field and I went to the hover, it's actually grayed out, and I can't change or add, I can't change a lot of the settings or add a new data field. All of this has to be done when the state is set to default. Okay, so we're gonna go and put the product name back in. And you can see some things like aligned baselines or vertical spacing. These are things that do in fact affect where the text is. You can even have text wrap. You can have below value or above value, which isn't working 100% of the time. Is something that I've noticed, the position below and above. But for now, we're going to ignore these things, and we're going to simply turn off the label for default. The reason being that I actually just want to have the image of the shoe, and I only want it to be seen hover. So now I've set the states to hover, and I'm turning on the label. And this is what happens. So now on hover, it's actually showing the name of the value. It's showing the name of the product, but only when my mouse hovers over it. We're also going to go to selected, and we're going to turn this on as well. And by default, this is what it looks like. It's got a white color and a black background. The white color is here, and you can actually see that the black background isn't something that you can change. And this is because you actually have to go back to default, make sure that the background is on or off. This is a little bit weird, and I'm not 100% sure how you can get to a selected state and change this background color, because this background is the background for the text itself. And now we're going to get to the meat of the button slicer, which is the states of the images. The first thing to know is that most of what you're going to want to do is on the default state, and you're going to be able to do things like set the actual image, which we saw earlier. You can set the image fit to normal, fit, or fill. Fill is usually the best because it means that it auto scales. You can also set the transparency, the saturation, which means that if it's at 0% saturation, it's really just, it's like black and white. If it's 100%, it's got all the colors it should have. And you can, it's like set a blur, which is pretty cool if you want to put it on a hover effect or something. If you click set as background, it will basically work as a background. And now you'll see that if I hover over something, the text is basically just treating it as though it's part of the background. And if I do not have this option set on, then you can see that it will move the then it will actually move the image slightly. How it moves when on hover actually depends on the position. So if I click on left, for example, and I hover, you can actually see that the text is showing to the left or the right. The image goes to the left here. And if I set it to the bottom, then you can see the text actually shows up at the top. One of the things that I recommend to almost always select is to hit the ignore padding, because if you don't have the ignore padding, it's not going to show the it's going to have this extra padding area around the image. I don't really think you need that because it just isn't required. And this is a much better visualization for your end users. This is the default state, and of course you've got hover, press, and selected, and you can actually do something, it's like interesting, like on hover, you can make the image more blurry. So now I've put around 50% blurriness, so if I hover over it, you can see that the text shows, but the picture has now become a little bit more blurry. I can even do something like this, where I select the ignore padding to be turned off. Now the image actually becomes a tiny bit smaller, which is what maybe it's like I'd like to happen, so that the actual name of the product becomes a little bit more prominent on the hover. You've also got, it's like on press and selected, which I'm not going to go into right now. And finally, you have the button options. These button options are basically the regular options that you would see on the original button. You've got what kind of padding you have. Do you want wide padding? Narrow padding? This really depends more on the actual text itself, and because I think I have custom padding, I don't think it actually does anything, and I do believe we've already set the ignore padding option on, so this isn't really anything to it's like look at. You've got borders on the actual buttons as well, but you can turn those borders off. Those borders, all of these options are things you can it's like set a specific state to. So if I wanted, I could have the border only show up on the hover, which is a cool effect. And it's like these are things you can go and play around with. I'm gonna go back to default. Got fill as well. The fill right now is gray, but if I turn this off, or I made this, it's like white or something, it could in fact make the image slightly whiter or darker. You can even have the fill be a specific image, but we're not going to go too deep into this right now. We've also got, of course, shadows, got the glows, and you've got accent bars that you can attach. So for example, if I turn the glow and shadow off, but I've only got the accent bar, if I went to hover and there I turn the shadow on, then you can see that you can do a lot of weird, it's like things to make things, to move around. I think that's not really necessary for now, and I think this is more than enough for you to actually show that this is the actual text itself. Now that we have these two items, there's only a couple more things that I need to do in order to make the visualization that I was showing initially. First, we just need to create a couple of cards. Actually, all of these items are cards, and this is an image that I've added. So first, I'm going to make sure the background is a specific color. The canvas background can be a gray. I think I put it at 68%, something like this. I'm going to go back to the slicer visual, go to size and style, make sure the background is turned off. That's fine by me. We're going to insert two things, and we're going to click on the insert shapes, and we're going to click this, where we're going to insert this as a shape. This is a white border that I'm going to add. So in the size and style, in the shape style, I'm going to make the fill white and without borders. And I'm going to copy this, paste it down there to have a black setting. So now this is already the visualization I'm basically trying to show. We're going to throw in a couple of cards. So let's go to the data, and we're going to put in image 2, and we're going to make this image 2 into a card. I'm using the new card visual because what I want to do is I want to show this as an image. I'm going to turn off all of the borders and things as well in the formatting. So we're going to go to cards, we're going to turn off the fill, the border, and of course I could just use this as the, it's like image URL, but I'm going to go to the data set and make sure the image is, image 2 is set as an image URL, and that should help me make the image on this item be this specific thing. So now we can actually see this is the second image. Maybe the second image isn't exactly what I'd like to show. Maybe I want to show just the first image, but that's okay. I'm going to the callout, and I'm turning off the values as well as the label. And now I've got an image. Maybe this specific item, as I mentioned, isn't what I want to show. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to copy this 3 times. Control C and Control V. And I'm going to put in different image items here. So instead of image 2, this one is going to be image 3. This one's going to be image 4. And this will be image 5. Great. So image 5 actually looks pretty good. Maybe I'll make this one the largest one. So we're gonna make this large and we're gonna make these ones quite small. And once we've done that, we're going to also make sure that all of these items no longer have a background. And great. So we've got these three different, it's like images. Maybe we'll center this a little bit more. And then we're gonna take the product name and the product description into their own cards. We're going to format this without a background, without a label, but the values will be, let's put 20. Then copying the card, I am going to put in the product information here, which will be called the description. And in the description, I also need to make sure that this is a little bit smaller in the text. So let's make this 12, maybe let's make this 14, and we'll make sure that the text is wrapped so you can see everything. Great. And simply by adding the Nike symbol, you basically have a full completed Nike shoe dashboard that you can use with the new button slicer. I really hope you learned something today. Thanks for watching. Take care.